I read numbers that they used in just a couple of days the amount of Patriot missiles to defend the airspace of the US allies in the Middle East that they have used for a whole year in Ukraine. Whereas in the Iran case, I mean, a NATO member is actively participating, and another NATO ally is actively being targeted.
Now we've got reports that Russia is supporting Iran. They're giving them intelligence. They're giving them satellite imagery. So clearly, Russia has a stake in the conflict in Iran. Should Europe counteract?
First of all, I want to say what you led with in this question, the 3-day war and the regime change, the quick regime change. It sounds familiar a little bit, right? Putin was saying about his special military operation.
Welcome to FO Talks. With me again is Sebastian Schaffer. He's the director of the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe, a regional think tank based in Vienna. Sebastian and I have often spoken about the Russian invasion in Ukraine, except this time we will be talking about the war in the Middle East. Thank you, Sebastian, for speaking to Fair Observer once again.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Right. So today we've got a war in Ukraine. Russia still controls large parts of the territory. And now we are seeing this war in Iran. And the reason this is crucial is because the Strait of Hormuz has been blocked. That's where 20% of global oil passes through. Europe requires oil from that region. And in fact, 10% of Europe's oil comes from the Middle East. It passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, when the war began in Russia, Europe had to completely cut off ties from the Russian Federation. They had to cut off their gas. They had to cut off their oil from Russia. And this was in 2022. Now, with the war in Iran, what options does Europe have? Because, of course, Europe's energy is being affected.
Yes. So it seems like we are running from one catastrophe into another, and Europe again seems to be divided and not well prepared on the first look. But if we look a bit closer, we can see that a lot has been done. You mentioned that there was a lot of efforts to phase out oil and gas coming from the Russian Federation. With oil, that has been largely achieved. With gas, it will take a little bit more time. Then, of course, it was also something that was achieved by looking for alternative sources, and these can be partially affected by this blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. But in general, I would say, I mean, what Europe needs to do is continue investing in renewable energy. There are also some talks about going back to nuclear energy. It's a debate that I think, on the one hand, if we have existing capacities to make use of them, is certainly a wise road to pursue. Thinking about building new nuclear power plants without subsidies coming from countries is something that I don't see. And then I question why we would invest in this technology instead of ramping up renewable energies. And then, of course, I mean, there's other partners. One of the most important ones is Norway when it comes to especially natural gas. From the point of view of the European Union, it's a European country, but from the point of view of the European Union. And then there is also hopes that, for instance, Romania will become next year an exporter of gas with the Neptune Deep gas reservoir in the Black Sea. So there are alternatives, but of course, I mean, we are sort of recovering from one shock, and then the next shock comes, and especially if it's a shock that is more or less imposed, because again, this was unprovoked and I think largely unnecessary at this time.
Right. And Sebastian, I remember in 2022 when Russia began the invasion of Ukraine, the European Union made a big fuss about how this was going to affect Europe. especially when it came to securing its energy. Because I mean, the attack started in February. It was peak winter at that time, and I mean, the world kind of ignored Europe's pleas. But now, when you've got this war in Iran and kind of the world's energy is being affected, everyone is realizing the point Europe was making then. But I want to go towards the military side, because when Russia started off the invasion in Ukraine, they took a lot of help from Iran, especially in getting drones. And the drone that comes to my mind is the Shahed 36. Russia bought them in large numbers, reverse engineered them, and then created their own model called the Geran 2. Now we've got reports that Russia is supporting Iran. They're giving them intelligence, they're giving them satellite imagery. So clearly, Russia has a stake in the conflict in Iran. Should Europe counteract?
Well, on the one hand side, yes, but rather indirectly than directly, I would say. Because as has been stated also by, for instance, the High Representative for the Foreign and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas from the European Union, this is not our war. The German Chancellor also said it's not our war. Some other European leaders have followed. And I think that on the one hand, again, this is something that with all the despicable acts that the regime in Iran has been doing to its own population, I think it's an escalation that is at that time really nothing that was necessary at this moment. But I'm also not an expert on the Iran nuclear program, so I can't tell if they would have achieved the nuclear bomb soon. But on the other hand, I mean, there were other possibilities to negotiate. I believe that here there were much more avenues to pursue, as it has been the case, for instance, with the Russian Federation, because the Russian Federation wanted to escalate. In this case, I think the US to a certain extent, and especially also Israel, wanted to escalate. Now we have that escalation, and now we have to see. What I believe is important is I don't see that there is a Russia-Iran axis, but they support each other as you have described. And this has an effect on Europe and on the European Union, because a direct neighbor, a candidate country to become a member of the European Union, is affected by these drones and this cooperation of the Russian Federation with Iran. And that means that we need to get involved, because the oil price that is rising is going to enable the Russian Federation to have more money to spend on the war against Ukraine. And so this cooperation reinforces each other with technology, with sharing intelligence, as you described. And in this case, I would say, yes, Europe needs to get involved, not directly with an attack on Iran, but the broader ramifications that it has for the continent.
Sebastian, you're absolutely right, because before the war began, Russia was selling its oil for cheap, and largely to countries like India and China. But now that the war has begun and we are staring at a global oil crisis, the United States has, in fact, okayed countries from buying Russian oil. And now Russia has better playing cards. They're not giving oil to India at a discounted price anymore. They're actually asking for full price, because there's such a limited option. And this is where I want to talk about the United States. Of course, they're playing multiple games right now. They're supporting Ukraine against Russia, but they're also telling India to buy Russian oil. Of course, their military is engaged in the Middle East. It's striking Iran almost on a daily basis. Do you think the United States is maybe too stretched? And why I'm worried is because it could lead to Ukraine being completely ignored in the long run, or even in the short run.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the major challenges now is that it was already clear that the European Union needs to ramp up its support for Ukraine, because how Trump has been behaving towards Ukraine I mean, the infamous meeting of President Zelensky with Trump is now 1 year ago in the White House. It was clear that they need to ramp up. It was also clear that they need some time. But what we see now with this additional things that you have described, it's also fairly clear. I mean, I read numbers that they used in just a couple of days, the amount of Patriot missiles to defend the airspace of the US allies in the Middle East, that they have used for a whole year in Ukraine. And so this is, of course, something where we can see this will be missing. This cannot be easily replaced. The European Union and Europe is trying. They're the biggest financial supporters of Ukraine by now. Germany is ramping up here, especially the support, and they emerge as the biggest single country supporter of Ukraine. But it's not enough. It's not enough. And I mean, you can see the erratic behavior of President Trump when it comes to calling, we don't need support from Ukraine regarding the drone experiences that they have. We don't need the UK to come and send their ships. And a week later, he's calling for NATO support to secure the Strait of Hormuz, which is, on the one hand, nothing that NATO needs to be doing, because NATO is a defensive alliance. But on the other hand, I mean, if the partners within NATO are not willing to support that, to threaten to dismantle again this defensive alliance from the White House is just, you know, every week it's a different standpoint, and this erratic behavior is making it very, very complicated to plan for the long run in general, but also in the short run. And this will, of course, ultimately the biggest price, apart from the direct belligerence, is going to be paid by the Ukrainian people.
Yes, and I want to talk about US President Donald Trump's actions, I should say, because when he went into Iran, he was very confident that it would be done in 3 days, maximum a week. There would be a regime change. That's not really happened. In fact, Iran has stood tall and they've hit back. And now, as you rightfully said, Sebastian, Trump is asking for allied support to come to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz. He's asked all of NATO. He's in fact even asked China, Japan, and India to step in, which is very surprising. And yes, as you also said, he's declined Ukraine's support in giving these drone interceptors. So what's really happening here is that when the war started in Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine, NATO was largely in one camp. At that time, it was the Biden administration in the United States. They were more than willing to support Ukraine. They gave them weapons, they gave them intelligence, they gave them all kinds of support, and so did the other NATO members. But now, when you looked at there's another theater coming up in Iran, and the United States is asking, especially the European allies, to send warships. And yesterday I saw British Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying, this is not our war, we're not sending anything. Do you think there are cracks deepening in NATO now because of the war in Iran?
First of all, I want to say what you led with in this question, the 3-day war and the regime change, the quick regime change. It sounds familiar a little bit, right?
Yes.
Putin was saying about his special military operation in Ukraine. So I really don't. I mean, it's not comparable in many ways, but there are some similarities that we can see, and I really don't hope, for all of our sake, that this is not something that will drag on for more than 4 years, as it is in the case of Ukraine. I think one major challenge here is that we still have not learned to work with these transactionalism that Trump is demanding all the time. And I think it would have been a good opportunity to say, look, if you want support in this case, we also need support for what is important for us. And this is, of course, on the one hand, it's a difference in Ukraine because there is no direct military combatants from NATO countries yet. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the Iran case, I mean, a NATO member is actively participating, and another NATO ally is actively being targeted. Turkey, I mean, I think 3 missiles have been intercepted by NATO allies at the moment, and so this has a different quality. But I think there would have been an opportunity to really better prepare for such a scenario, and then say, okay, look, if you do that, what will be the consequences for us with regards to Ukraine? How can we prevent that? Especially when it is a time that we've been through the worst winter in this full-scale invasion in Ukraine. They are coming out of this. They are gaining some ground on the front lines. And then this happens. So they don't get a chance to breathe. And then by extension, also not the European partners in Ukraine. And so this is really something where I believe it would have been possible to better coordinate. But it also seems to be impossible to sort of do that with President Trump's administration, because also if we look at the defense, is it called war minister now? I don't know. Peter Hegseth has the same erratic behavior. When you look at him saying like, this is a war, no, this is not a war, the war is over, no, it goes on. How can you deal with that if something that was true one day is no longer true the other day? And this again is a similarity that I see between the Kremlin and the White House at the moment, which makes it very complicated for Europe, which has their own problems. Yeah? I mean, it's not that they are perfect in their governance, right. Because of course we have a broad variety of stances towards the situation, where I would say Keir Starmer says, okay, it's not our war, but they are still an ally of the US, where we could see, for instance, in Spain, it's fairly clear that they say, look, this was a mistake. Don't do this. Don't use Spanish infrastructure. We are not supporting you, even though we are NATO allies.
Yeah, Sebastian, I find it very interesting, the two parallels you've drawn between the White House and the Kremlin. But I've been speaking to a lot of Europeans. Of course, I've spoken to you a lot of times in the last 1 year. And one thing that's really struck with me is that most Europeans are saying we cannot trust the current administration in the United States the way we've been able to trust previous administrations. And in this 1 year, the kind of diplomatic moves that Europe has made has been very impressive, I should say. They've struck trade deals with Mercosur, which is the alliance of the countries in Latin America. They struck a major trade deal with India. Do you think now, given that there's a war in Ukraine, there's a war in Iran, Europe wants to find diplomatic solutions, and it can't rely on the United States, so it's looking at other reliable partners?
Absolutely. But then it also is not fully utilizing this potential. Yeah? I mean, on the one hand, what you described, yes. So Europe has always been, or the European Union in that matter, has always been what is described as a soft power. Yeah? So this diplomatic efforts is really something that is the foundation of the strength of European Union foreign actions. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I mean, you mentioned the Mercosur. When they finally reach that deal, then the European Parliament steps in, and we can debate about if this is correct or not. I have a very strong opinion on that, but right. Then also respect parliamentarians. But I mean, you know, that we see like 1.5 steps forward and then 1 step back when it comes to various aspects also, digital sovereignty, strategic autonomy, becoming a military player, coordinating amongst each other in foreign and security policy. And we simply don't have that time, because it's an illusion to think that if an administration changes, be it in the Kremlin or in the White House, or if a war ends, be it in Ukraine and or Iran, that we will go back to some sort of multilateral security architecture order that works globally. This is over. These things are over. There will be something else. What it will look like, there are different scenarios in which that can go from bad to worse at the moment, unfortunately. But we cannot believe that something would return if we just muddle through.
So how can Europe be the leader in that? If you're saying it's going to be something new, something fresh, you're talking about the global order now. Can Europe again find its place as a leader, as a same voice in the geopolitical scenario?
Absolutely, it can. It absolutely has this power. If we look at it globally, it is still the most stable continent. It has one call it overregulation. I at the moment call it provides a framework that is very complicated to dismantle if you want to destroy institutions that uphold democratic values. And it does have a still innovative power, still technologies that can also be developed in the future for future challenges. It still has enough possibility to retain some sort of position in the world. This fragmentation is very challenging to it, and this fragmentation is amplified by other global players, and this makes it very complicated to better coordinate this. And if they would have a better agreement on especially the crucial things, there are only a couple of policy areas on an EU level where there is still a requirement for unanimity. But these are all the crucial areas where we have challenges at the moment and will have for the foreseeable future. Foreign and security policy, migration and asylum, taxation. So these are enlargement. These are the things where we see challenges where any country can use it to extort something for themselves, and we've seen it far too often. And it's not only Hungary, it's not only Slovakia. Others have done it too, we should mention here, but very recently we see that there are no reliable EU member governments when it comes to these new challenges. Because if you look at the Hungarian parliamentary election that will be in less than a month, and the positioning of Viktor Orban with writing an op-ed for a German newspaper, which is basically, like rolling out the red carpet for the Kremlin, we really have to see if those are reliable partners in the overall new global order that will sooner or later emerge.
Right. Europe has been accustomed to extremely volatile situations, and this goes back to, of course, World War I, World War II, and then the Cold War. Now with the war in Ukraine, Russia has issued multiple nuclear threats. The Kremlin has even threatened to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine to secure their military objectives. Now with the war in the Middle East, a recent poll showed that 92% Iranians support developing a nuclear weapon, because they say that that's the deterrent and the safety that that the country needs at the moment. So Europe has history, it has background to these nuclear tensions. Do you think the EU is largely worried about the world reaching to these levels where we could be seeing an all-out global war, possibly even the use of nuclear weapons?
I mean, if we look at the doomsday clock, the infamous doomsday clock, I think it's never been closer to midnight than now. I believe, and of course, I mean it's a bit of a publicity stunt because I don't think it's an adequate measurement. But the message behind it is very true, unfortunately. And I mean, I didn't know about these numbers in Iran, but I can understand them. I can understand them also when I look at, I mean, what is the consequence that Ukraine, after this war ends, however that will look like? What is the consequence that they would see out of this? Yeah? They signed in 1994 the Budapest Memorandum. The Budapest Memorandum said that they give up their nuclear arsenal that they had from the time of the Soviet Union, give it to the Russian Federation, and in exchange, the United States and the Russian Federation guarantee territorial integrity. Yesterday is the fourth anniversary of the. Sorry, not the fourth anniversary. It's the 12th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea. That was the first violation of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, basically declaring the Budapest Memorandum void. So the logical consequence here would be that countries, middle power countries, say, okay, if I cannot rely on security guarantees that are provided by bigger nuclear powers, I might as well develop a nuclear weapon myself. And this, of course, such an arms race, if that would happen, collapsing the global treaties on the ban of the use of nuclear proliferation, that makes, of course, the possibility of a nuclear war much more likely, because the more actors you have, the more likely it becomes that something is being used. And this is really something that should worry us, that this consequence is probably an additional arms race. We already see it anyways. Yeah, countries are arming up, and it might even work in this direction. And then we haven't even talked about countries that also have nuclear weapons openly or secretly, that might also make use of it or become part of a different theater that opens up, maybe in Asia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brilliant, Sebastian. As always, it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Same here. Thank you very much. Always good to talk to you. And yeah, let's hope that the next time we talk, the situation de-escalates a little bit globally.
Indeed.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.